Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. We are amazed. Nothing began to call and it's things. Yeah. Thank you very much. Lots of I would go to the I should have. I should. I'm not sure. Because yesterday was the busy day. So if you have any things on the paper, it should be there, but in the meantime, I go and. Yes.
Sì, sì. You want to check? After that, sì. Evitiliano, sale, sì, è chiuso. Naturalmente sì, sì, era stato se scegliere questa, sì, vado avanti da qui. Sì. Due parole, azione. Sì.
E poi passavo al panel.
Io e Siena scendiamo l'opportunità. Se mi fanno il mio sopra, tanto non posso emozionare. Sì.
Però posso stare in piedi. Questo
Sì, che lei è sparita un attimo,
vediamo se poi c'è vicino, ci vado anch'io e poi
giusto qua fuori,
perfetto, fai. Sorry, first time. Yeah, just
Io partirei, ti ricordo, così siamo precisi. Ok. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session entitled Enhancing NDC 3.0, the role of carbon markets in emission reduction and removals. The session is organized by the European University Institute in collaboration with ICAP, with the Tsinghua University and the Seoul International Law Academy. My name is Simone Borghesi. I am the director of the climate area at the Florence School of Regulation of the European University Institute. I'm vice rector at the University of Siena and president of the European Association of Environmental Resource Economists. It's a great pleasure to discuss this important topic today because NDCs are at the heart of the Paris Agreement as they reflect the domestic efforts to reduce emissions. And as you know, we want to progressively increase the ambition every 5 years, and we are on the way to February 2025 when the new submissions will occur. To update the NDCs, parties need to consider further emission reductions and removals. But how can we do that? What can be the role of carbon markets in doing that? So this is the topic we want to discuss. But to start with, I'm honored to have an introductory intervention by Director Li Gao. Li Gao is Director General of the Department of Climate Change at the Ministry of Ecology and Environment in China. He has had many commitments, and among many things, he is responsible for the implementation of the National Climate Change Strategy, the development of the Chinese ETS, and international negotiations. Previously, he was with the Ministry of Science and Technology and participated in the UN climate change negotiations as one of China's main negotiators since 2005. Li has a PhD from Tsinghua and a master's degree from Yale and Tsinghua. So I invite Li to come on stage and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my great pleasure to participate in this side event during the COP29. And COP still an exciting arena for me. Even my role has changed from a negotiator to a member of parliament. Climate change is a global challenge to the future of human societies and the sustainable development of all countries. The international community has been paying special attention to this crisis with increasing concerns. The damage of climate change is more serious. Research suggests that the losses caused by climate change can reach 4% of annual global GDP by 2050. If climate change policies cannot be implemented effectively, the losses could be even greater. As a developing country, particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, China is experiencing a warming rate that exceeds the global average. It brings significant negative impacts to the public health, well-being, and our economy. China has always highly valued the work for addressing climate change, and we integrated the efforts to achieve carbon peaking and carbon neutrality into the overall framework of ecological civilization construction and socio-economic development. A 1+N policy framework for carbon peaking and carbon neutrality has been established. a national carbon emission trading market with the largest coverage of greenhouse gas emission in the world has been successfully launched and smoothly run. After the 3 years of construction and operation, China's national carbon market witnessed great improvement in many aspects. For example, the quota allocation method has been continuously optimized, and the role as the carbon price discovery mechanism is functioning better. The awareness of emission reduction of enterprises and their compliance ability have been significantly enhanced, and the quality of carbon emission data has been significantly improved. On the first day of COP29, parties agreed on the standards for Article 6.4 and a dynamic mechanism to update them. This is an exciting and encouraging achievement. I would like to extend my great congratulations and thanks to negotiators who made this happen. This is important for a global carbon market and is also very important for the international development of China's carbon market. In China, the interim regulations on the administration of carbon emission trading have been publicly released, and we are currently considering ways to gradually expand the industrial coverage of our carbon market, developing management measures and supporting technical standards to the National Voluntary Emission Trading Scheme. Meanwhile, we are enhancing systematic training on carbon markets regulations, policies, technical specifications, and other related aspects for players of the national carbon market. We believe the power of market in our efforts to address climate change, and it's highly expected that the national carbon market will play a crucial and effective role for achieving China's NDCs and fulfilling our dual carbon goals. And we have strong interest in enhancing exchange and cooperation with our international partners on carbon market development. Dear colleagues, due to the reason that we all know, the multiple process for addressing climate change will face more difficulties and barriers in the coming few years. But I'm confident that with the solidarity of international community, with sticking to multilateralism, with strengthening the international cooperation, we can overcome the difficulties and barriers. The global chain for green and low carbon developments will continue. Let's make our contribution to a great success of COP29 here in Baku to send out a clear and strong signal in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Lee, for your inspiring words. that we will keep as a roadmap for these days. I will now start the session with 3 scene-setting presentations. I will go first, then Stefano, Clara, and Xiliang, and then we'll open up to the panel and to the concluding remarks at the end. But let me start with a few reflections that come from the results that of the project that I direct at the European University Institute. The project is called COAS, which stands for Collaborative Observatory for the Assessment of the EU ETS, but the acronym is clearly a tribute to the 1991 Nobel Prize economist Ronald Coase. The project started at the beginning of 23, will run until the end of 25, and the aim is to support EU and national policymakers in implementing and developing the EU ETS, but including integration with other carbon markets. The ultimate goal, or the ambition, if you want, is to establish a global observatory on carbon markets at the European University Institute that can be useful and provide useful information for policymakers in Europe and outside Europe. So the topic today is carbon markets and removals and NDCs. Now, current NDCs, we know, are, if fully implemented, will lead to emissions peaking before 2030. In 2030, emissions are expected to be almost 50%, 49.8 higher than in 1990. However, these targets depend on conditional elements such as increased finance, technology transfer, cooperation, and carbon capacities. The actual or expected emission path might diverge, as the figure shows, very much whether or not these conditional elements will actually take place. Current NDCs are unfortunately insufficient nowadays to reach the goal of the Paris Agreement. As the figure from the UNFCCC NDC synthesis report shows, we are unfortunately still far from the targets, and we need to move to the, let's say, blue area if we want to reach or likely to stay below 2 Celsius degrees, and even more if we want to stay below 1.5 and avoid overshooting. For this, we need to drastically reduce emissions and also drastically update the level of ambition and control of our emission trajectories. So what can be the role of carbon markets for this? We know that ETSs are increasingly important climate policies and have been spreading at the world level, including China with a very important development. But how can these carbon markets raise the ambition we need? I think we have 2 levels to distinguish, domestically and internationally. Domestically, they can raise ambition by increasing policy stringency, expanding to new sectors, and integrating carbon removals. Internationally, by expanding to emerging and developing economies and through cooperative approaches. I will focus more on the domestical side and on the EU as a case study that can be important for all other jurisdictions. So starting from the first strategy, policy stringency, we have seen an increasing policy stringency at the EU level over time, which turn out into lowering emissions, as the figure shows. Emissions in Europe decreased by 41% and around 48% in the EU ETS covered sectors. And projections tell us that this emissions fall is expected to continue. The recent reforms further increase the stringency. The cap is expected to reach 0 by 2040. There are higher intake rate and invalidation of allowances in the Market Stability Reserve. And there is the phasing out of free allowances as we move to CBAM. But barriers exist to further reforms because the effects of higher stringency was obviously higher carbon prices, which raised concern over competitiveness and also policy acceptability, as we recently witnessed with some vocal, let's say, protest. The second way in which carbon markets can raise the ambition is by expanding to new sectors. The EU ETS can be expanded to additional countries and additional sectors, and has been actually expanded already in the past. The figure that you see here is from our Life Coast project and shows the evolution of the installations coverage over time from the beginning up to now. Above the zero, you have the new entries of installations, and below the exits. And as you see in green, you have the new installations due to the sector expansion. So it had a big role. And in yellow, the exits, but in purple, the Brexit as a large cause of exits. So as I like to say, the EU ETS is a living creature that keeps changing over time. But we can certainly consider new sectors in the EU ETS. Actually, the largest sector expansion will be probably the next one, because we are going towards the EU ETS 2 that is going to be born. And efficiency consideration would suggest to merge ETS 1 and 2 to reach a uniform allowance price. However, there are also hurdles: administrative burden, adverse competitiveness effects, and what we can define a teething problem that would that suggest to keep the two systems separate to start with, at least in the first stage. The extension to new sectors might involve also agriculture, or at least there is a debate on this, because agriculture is a polluter in terms of methane emissions, in particular nitrous oxide, as we know. And as you see from this graph, the projected fall in agricultural emissions is very little, or actually almost none in some cases. But is the EU ETS the right tool to reduce emissions in the agri-food sector? Well, here again, unfortunately, there are problems. Data availability, the feasibility and the high cost of an MRV process, and again, public acceptability. So I believe that any measure needs to consider the whole value chain and ensure that stakeholders are involved in this decision to extend the ETS to agriculture, so going for an ETS 3 or any other measure as well needs this involvement. The third way in which carbon markets can raise ambition is by integrating carbon removals. At the moment, this occurs basically only in New Zealand, where allowances can be generated by non-government actors in the forestry sector. However, other jurisdictions are considering this instrument. The UK, for instance, signaled its intention to include engineer removals, and also the EU is considering this option. There are pros and cons in integrating carbon removals. The pros are that we could support both reduction and removals because we have the architecture already there, and we could alleviate liquidity problems that might raise as the cap goes towards zero. The cons, the concerns are that removals might deter mitigation. They might have an impact on the ETS integrity. There are problems due to the anticipated price discrepancy between the EU ETS and CDR cost, and also liability requirements in case of a reversal. In the Life Coast project, we discussed this topic with experts and policymakers, and our proposal, policy recommendations are the following. First, moving from net targets to 3 separate targets for gross GHG reductions, land-based sequestration, and permanent CDR, because this, in our view, could avoid mitigation deterrence. Secondly, it will be important to establish an independent body that ensures the quantity and quality of the CDR. And thirdly, we might think beyond, out of the box, let's say, beyond the ETS as an instrument to integrate carbon removals, assessing alternatives or complementary options, such as CDR purchase obligation for specific activities or public procurement. So in a nutshell, I think there are many ways to step up NDC targets with carbon pricing. Domestically, the EU ETS, but the ETS in general, actually, can further increase policy stringency, can expand to new sectors, but with caution, and can integrate carbon removals to induce the deployment of removal technologies. But let me say that using or paraphrasing a popular political slogan in these days, mitigation first. Mitigation should be the priority to avoid that there is this deterrence risk. So I discussed about the international, the domestic approach. What about the international one? I will leave this to the next speakers. So next, please. And I invite on stage Stefano de Clara. Stefano is the head of the Secretariat at ICAP and leads the ICAP's technical dialogue, knowledge sharing, and capacity building activities. In the past, he was the director of the international policy at IETA, the International Emissions Trading Association. So, Stefano, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simone, for the great introduction and setting presentation, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. I will basically pick up where Simone left off and dig a bit further into what could actually be the role for emission trading systems and carbon pricing more broadly in, on one hand, incentivizing the deployment of removal technologies, and by doing that, also what could be the role of these policy tools in achieving net zero. Just a quick, whoop, I think like the slides are stuck. Oh, there we go. Good. Just a quick note of context on why I'll be talking about this and where we come from. ICAP is a partnership that brings together more than 40 governments worldwide that get together under the auspices of ICAP to jointly work on the design and implementation of compliance emission trading systems. And ICAP is one of the key places where governments get together when they want to understand exactly how these topics might influence the development of emission trading systems going forward. And we've done quite a lot of work on understanding, again, the relationship between emission trading systems and removals, and more broadly, the role that emission trading systems can play in reaching net zero. To provide some context to that discussion, I just wanted to quickly recap of where we are with implementation of emission trading systems globally. And as of today, we do have 36 emission trading systems in place. They jointly cover roughly 10 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions. More or less 50% of those gigatons are covered by the Chinese ETS. And on that note, I think it's great that we have such an extensive cooperation and involvement with China in the organization of this side event. Those 10 gigatons represent roughly 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is not sufficient, but it is a decent proportion of the overall global greenhouse gas emissions. And this is what the global implementation of emission trading system looks like if you visualize it on the map. So those countries that are in blue are the 36 that operate in emission trading systems as of today. The countries in the two shades of green are either already actively working on developing a system or are considering the implementation of one. We will not have time to go into all of these systems today, but I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the global reach of these policy tools. If you look at the map, they basically span almost all continents. And if you look a bit more closely, you will also notice the extent to which emission trading systems are becoming a central key policy tool in most of the G20 economies. Again, we have China that has operated an emission trading system for a number of years now and is looking at expanding it and improving it. But we also have key economies as Indonesia that launched an emission trading system last year. And looking ahead, India, Turkey, Brazil, Colombia are all expected to launch emission trading systems, roughly speaking, between now and 2030. So again, emission trading systems will be at the forefront of decarbonization in key economies worldwide. So what's the catch? The catch is that so far, emission trading systems have proven to be really effective policy tools at reducing emissions. What remains to be seen is whether and how and the extent to what they can actually incentivize removals. And there's also a key question mark on what role they can play in net zero compliant decarbonization trajectories. And this is what we want to reflect on today. As of today, again, we have on one side emission trading systems, so market for removals, and on the other side market for removals. The two things, as Simone also pointed out, are to a large extent fully separated today, with a few exceptions that I will be talking about. But basically, again, on one side, we have emission trading systems that operate as policy tool to reduce emissions. And on the other side, we have a nascent market for removal units. This mainly exists outside of emission trading system, and as of today, it is mainly supported by voluntary action or by dedicated policies that incentivize the deployment of removal technologies, and in some cases also procure removal credits. And by doing that, they generate a demand signal for removals. But again, the two systems, with a few exceptions, are fully separated as of today. A while back, I think this was 3 or 4 years ago, as ICAP, we did some work to understand whether and how the two markets can actually be integrated and whether the two markets can talk to each other. And we came up with 4 different models for potentially integrating removals in emission trading systems. The first model would be to keep the two markets disconnected, and as Simone pointed out, it would mean that on one side, you have emission trading systems that will reduce emissions, but on the other side, you need other technologies and other policies to generate a demand signal for removal credits, which is a potential construct. The other 3 models instead talk about whether and how removals can be integrated in compliance markets. I'll go through these really quickly. If you want to dig further into this, there's a full ICAP publication dedicated to the topic. But basically, under one model, you could have the government acting as a middleman between the two markets, if anything, also to bridge the price differential that there is between the market for allowances and the price needed to deploy removals, which is also something that Simone talked about. In some policy circles, you hear discussions about a central carbon bank or construct of this kind. This would pretty much be this model where there is a structure that connects the two markets. A different model, and this is model C, would be to connect the two markets with some restrictions, but with no middleman between the two. This is quite similar to how offsetting mechanisms currently work in some emission trading systems, and this would mainly mean allowing covered entities under emission trading system to purchase removal credits and use them for compliance in the emission trading system. Obviously, a key consideration here is, again, to what extent you have a price differential between the two markets and whether this is actually a viable option. The last construct is Model D, which would be a fully integrated market where there's a full fungibility with no restrictions between allowances on one side and removals on the other side. This is, as Simone pointed out, the way that the New Zealand ETS integrated removals in the emission trading system, and where removals are under the coverage of the system, and there's full fungibility between allowances and the credits generated from removals activities. Again, this is a discussion that is still at its infancy and in the early stages, but we do have some examples of removals being integrated in compliance carbon pricing. Again, we have New Zealand, where the ETS covers forestry activity, and forestry removals can issue allowances that can be used in the system. And then we have a few examples of emission trading systems that allow for the use of offsets, and some of the offsetting activities that are allowed for compliance are related to removals activities. This is mainly in the forestry sector. And for example, methodologies for forestry sector offset generation in the California cap and trade system, in the Quebec ETS, in the Colombia carbon tax, and also looking ahead in the Chinese ETS, when the CCR mechanism will be fully up and running again, might generate removal credits that could be used for compliance. If you look at the previous slide, so this would be Model D in the case of New Zealand, and Model C in the case of emission trading systems or carbon taxes that allow for the use of carbon credits for compliance. So we are seeing some examples of that, but again, this is really at the early stages of the discussion. On the policy side, there are good reasons for why removals could be included in compliance carbon pricing, but also good reasons for why we need to be careful about that. Simone already touched upon this, but on the pro side, you obviously have the fact that your compliance instrument can become a source of incentive for removal and carbon dioxide removal activities deployment. It could also increase market liquidity, especially as ETS caps approach zero or net zero. And it could also introduce flexibility in the emission trading system. On the cons side, obviously, we know that there are concerns about undermining the environmental integrity if low quality units are allowed in the system. There's also risk of loss of control over decarbonization pathways, especially if removals are integrated with no limits and with no control systems. And there is the significant risk of abatement deterrence. As Simone pointed out, it is important to focus, especially at this point in time, on abatement, and we need to make sure that removal credits do not disincentivize abatement incentive under compliance carbon pricing. And again, the discussion on these points and on these two camps is something that will likely dominate the policy discussion around compliance emission trading systems over the next few years. More broadly, and moving beyond just the integration of removal credits in compliance emission trading systems, we also need to have a discussion around what role emission trading systems can have in decarbonization trajectories and in the policy mix needed to reach net zero more broadly than just the integration of removals. And this is also a pretty nascent discussion, but one that will likely dominate the policy discussion domain for the coming years. It's also an area of work where we're doing a lot of work and effort as ICAP, and you can expect a publication on this to come out in the next couple of months. I will not go into this too much in detail in the interest of time, but it is worth keeping in mind that emissions levels in the ETS and in the ETS covered sectors may or may not mirror broader jurisdictional goals, meaning that in any jurisdiction that has an ETS in place, you have some sectors that are covered by an ETS and sectors that are outside of ETS coverage, and the policy mix needed to reach net zero has to do with to what extent you can expect emissions to decline in ETS sectors as opposed to non-ETS sectors, and the relative speed of the emission declines on the two sides of the fence, so to speak. And this will also go through understanding whether an ETS in a given jurisdiction and as part of a given policy mix will be a net positive ETS in 2050 or around the net zero date, if it will be an absolute zero emission trading system, if it will be a net zero emission trading system with a net zero cap, again, through the integration of removals in an ETS, or whether it will be a net negative ETS, for example, to compensate for residual emissions or higher emission levels in non-covered sectors, or if as part of that, and as we get closer to 2050 and to net zero, jurisdictions might phase out emission trading systems in favor of other policy tools to reach net zero. And this is also an ongoing discussion. A few considerations there are that the future trajectory of ETS and their contribution to a net zero strategy is still an open question with multiple possibilities, and it is a nascent discussion. We're expecting to see much more debate on that over the coming years. Again, ETS emissions levels may or may not mirror the broader jurisdictional goals, and this will influence the role that emission trading systems will have in a net zero policy mix. We also need to have more discussion on what we actually mean by residual and hard to abate emissions. We keep on saying that removals can compensate for residual emissions or for hard to abate emissions, but we need to understand what it actually means and what those residual emissions levels will be, because again, this will have big implications for the design of emission trading systems. There are some risks associated with the process. Last but not least, we still need to demonstrate that CDRs will actually be available at scale to provide that compensating function. It's also worth keeping in mind that ETSs, under some of the construct that we talked about, can provide support for removals deployment, but likely will not be the only thing that is needed to do that at scale, and other policies might be needed alongside emission trading systems. And again, understanding the policy mix for net negative emissions is crucial for defining the role that ETSs can play in the long term and on the way to net zero. I'll keep it to that, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion for more on this topic. Simone, thank you, and the floor goes back to you.
Thank you, Stefano. A complimentary presentation that perfectly fits. And I will now invite Xiliang Zhang to come on stage. Xiliang is a professor of management science and engineering and director of the Institute of Energy, Environment and Economy at the Tsinghua University. He's a member of the National Experts Panel on Climate Change, chair of the Energy Systems Engineering Committee of the China Energy Research Society. He has been heading the expert group of national carbon market design since 2015 and was the lead author of the 4th and 5th IPCC climate change assessment report. So, Xiliang, the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing your view on the progress and challenges of the Chinese carbon market.
Thank you very much, Simone. Simone is a long-time friend of mine. So, and it's really a great pleasure to be a co-organizer of these set events. So I would like to take this opportunity to share some of my observations on the implications of China's NDC in terms of energy system transformation and also the role of a carbon market. Okay, so this slide shows I think the key elements of China's climate goals under the current NDC. So including peaking China's CO2 emission before the year 2030, and also achieving the carbon neutrality before the year 2060, and also under this NDC and China's energy system, so we will experience a radical transformation, and more than 80% of the energy
supply will come from renewable and nuclear, so by the year 2060. So now this slide shows a projection of the energy-related CO2 emissions by a model that call it China Global Energy Model, a model joint development by the Tsinghua University and MIT. So this is a projection of all group, and so this slide shows the picture of the decarbonization of the electricity sector. So so in China, we believe the decarbonization of the electricity sector is the core for China to achieve the carbon the peaking and particularly the carbon neutrality goals. So from the slides, you can see in the future by the year 2030, so more than 55% of the electricity supply will come from nuclear and renewable. By the year 2035, it's more than 60% of the energy supply will come from the nuclear and the renewables. Of course, if you look from the long perspective to achieve the carbon neutrality goals, you can see the CCUS, and the carbon removals, and that is negative emission technologies such as the BECCS will play a very important role. So in China's electricity system transformation, and also so to achieve the energy system transformation, then is a substantial investment. So in the sector, and so this slide shows what the various huge number of the fund investment needs to achieve the carbon neutrality transition. And also, of course, so as we see, we need a lot of low carbon and zero emission and also a negative emission technology be in place to achieve the carbon neutrality and transformation. We really need a carbon price to enable the transformations. So this slide, it shows how to say a projection of the carbon price, so to how to say to enable the transformations by the model of the CGM model, and it's a global energy economic model. So this also the price also shows so the scarcity of the emission in future will be increased substantially in the future. And now, so I would like to let's the implications. So some implications of the China's NDC in terms of the energy system transformation. Now I would like to see, okay, what's the policies actually China has been implemented and will be implemented. So I think in terms of the policy measures for to achieving the NDC targets. There are some general the policies such as the legislation but there are also some. We also need some specific policy instruments, including how to so-called the market-based policy instruments and also the command and control policy instruments. So and the carbon market is a new how to say member of China's climate policy family, but I think in the future, so it will be a play how to say a vital role. So to in terms of the energy system transformation. So now this slide gives us an overview of China's national compliance. The market, the national ETS. First is the coverage. It will cover the 8 energy and the carbon emission intensive sectors, including the port and marine sector and the iron and steel sector, and also the cement sector, and also the chemical and engineering sector. This together, so those sectors, the emission. The emission is covered by the program, so will be approximately 70% of China's total energy-related the emission. So right now at this stage, China for the cap setting, so the cap setting is intensity-based approach. That means that the intensity that the cap is indexed to the economic growth rate, and for the allowance allocation, so now the primary allocation methods, so is the output-based the free allocation, and that is so in this context, China's current ETS is largely tradable performance standards, but now we are working very hard. I try to introduce the auctioning and transit from the rate-based program to the mass-based program. So this is the outlook of China's compliance, the market, and that means the sector coverage is expanded to the six carbon intensity sectors before the year 2030. Right now, the program just cover the power generation sector, but before the year 2030, all the 8 energies intensive and the carbon intensive sector will be covered. And also, so the stringency of the sector benchmark, so will be enhanced step. And also auctioning will be introduced for the allowance allocation as early as possible. So for the past 2 years, our team worked very hard. So in assisting the Department of Climate Change, of MIE, formulating the proposals and options for reducing the auctioning. And also, it is expected the institutional investors will be allowed to enter the carbon markets as early as possible. And I think it's very important. So the program will be transit, as I mentioned, from a rate-based system to a mass-based system. I think before after the year 2030. Before the year 2030, China will achieve the peaking goals, and in that case, afterwards, I think China is ready for the China's emission trading program is ready for transit from the rate-based program to the mass-based the program. So I also think now China. So the voluntary carbon market also started operation last year. I think the voluntary carbon market will also provide additional incentives, and also the voluntary carbon market also play a unique role. So in China's energy low carbon energy economy transformation. First, I think that the carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And this technology largely will be deployed. So in the power generation sector, steel sector, chemical engineering sector, and the cement sector. So I think this technology development will be benefit from the introduction from the voluntary carbon market development, and also the carbon removal technologies such as the BECCS and the direct air capture. So this, I think, will be also benefit very much from the voluntary carbon market development. And also the renewable energies with these additionalities, such as solar thermal power generation, and the offshore wind, and the biofuels. The development of this kind of renewable energy technology will also be get more incentives under the voluntary carbon market. And also, I think China, so the transportation sector, and also the building sector is not covered by the emission trading program. That is not by the compliance carbon market. I think the decarbonization of the two sectors also be benefit from the introduction of the voluntary carbon market, and also to achieve the carbon neutrality. So we not only need to to mitigate the emission, to reduce the emission. We also need some carbon sinks to offset the emissions, such that China can achieve the carbon neutrality goals in a more effective way, in a cost-effective way. So that means for the carbon market and the voluntary carbon market will provide incentives and for the carbon sinks from the forestry and the agriculture sector. So I think I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. I will also very much look for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiliang. It's fascinating for me. I've been studying emission trading system for a while now, and it's fascinating to see the development of the Chinese carbon market every time. So I move now to the panel, and I would invite to come on board Laetitia Guimarães from the UNDP, Suh-Yong Chung from Korea University and SILA, Teng from Tsinghua University, and Xiaolu Cao from EDF. Before I introduce our 4 panelists, let me say that it is true, as Stefano and Xiliang were saying, that they're also good friends by now, after some years that we share views and we meet at COPs or other occasions. But it's also a great occasion to get to know new people, some of them actually already virtually known, some other new friends. This is also what COP is about, I think. So a few words about our panelist. Laetitia Guimarães is Global Team Leader for Carbon Markets at UNDP, where she works on developing countries' access to carbon markets. She has a long-standing experience as a senior advisor, an analyst, and project manager, focusing on finance mechanism and mitigation in developing countries. A member of the UNFCCC roster of technical experts as well. And Suh-Yong Chung is Professor of International Studies at the Korea University, where he directs the Center for Climate and Sustainable Development Law and Policy and the Center for Global Climate and Marine Governance. He's also Vice President of the Korean Society of Climate Change and a member of the Global Green Growth Institute and the UN Basel Convention as part of the Korean delegation in the UNFCCC negotiations. Teng is Professor and Deputy Director of the Institute of Energy, Environment and Economy at Tsinghua University, and among the many responsibilities is Secretary General of the Energy System Engineering Committee of the China Energy Research Society. And just to remember a few, he's lead author of the 5th and 6th Climate Change Assessment Reports of IPCC, and from 2007 to 2017 was a member of the Chinese negotiation team. And finally, Xiaolu is Senior Director for Climate at EDF, where she's responsible for the strategic design of programs related to climate change initiatives in China, with a specific focus on carbon pricing, and is responsible for project development and implementation. She joined the EDF in February 2011, and graduated in environmental engineering from University of Michigan and the Beijing Institute of Technology. So you see, we have all the expertise we need to discuss our topic. So let me propose a few questions and ask you for a reaction on this, and then we'll try to have a second round of questions. My general questions today, I think, to you are, what are the approaches taken by the parties in their NDC when it comes to carbon price? In particular, EU, China, and Korea, obviously. Is there a major divergence in the NDCs between those that already have a carbon price and those that do not, and among the advanced and emerging economies? How can international carbon markets and carbon market integration play a role in improving NDCs? And let's say, basic question: what's missing? What's missing to further develop a cooperative approach? And last but not least, seen from a European perspective, what can we do to increase the public support for enhanced NDCs and increase the public acceptability of emission trading system and climate policies in general? I know these are difficult questions, but I trust on your experience for up to the point reply. So I will probably start with Leticia and then go to the other speakers.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you so much to Simone for the invitation to be here. Indeed, some very difficult questions to address. My point will focus mainly on developing countries, which are the countries that I work with. Let's start by saying that around 80% of the NDCs mentioned that they will make use of carbon pricing or carbon marketing mechanisms for the achievement of their targets. That is a very significant number, and we see a trend that more and more countries are looking at these mechanisms as a way to reduce costs, attract new clean technology, and bring foreign direct investments to countries that usually don't have as much access to this type of resources. Now, countries that have the potential to generate these credits are a bit confused in this landscape of different carbon markets and how these carbon markets can play a role for the implementation of the NDCs. And I really like the presentations that came before because it gives a little bit of a perspective both from countries but also overall on how the different instruments can come together to support the achievement of these targets. At UNDP, we work with all types of carbon markets, starting with the development of what we call a carbon markets access strategy. So the idea is to look at the countries' NDCs, the landscape of existing projects, because in many cases, there are already voluntary carbon projects happening on the ground, and then understand what are the different sectors in which it makes sense to build maybe a domestic ETS to bring emissions down and reach the NDC targets in a more efficient manner. Maybe there are other sectors where international cooperation makes more sense because these are hard to abate emissions and will require a much higher investment. And there are other areas that the technology and the type of structure of projects is much more conducive to private sector types of partnerships. So there is no one size fit all structure or solution. We incentivize countries to understand their own context and develop their own specific strategies, and this will likely evolve over time. We see the European system took 20 to 30 years to get where it is now, and sometimes developing countries want to get there right away. We should take time, evaluate the NDC, understand the cost of the different mitigation opportunities, try and foster partnership with other countries that want to acquire ITMOs, and understand the best strategy for the specific countries. So I will leave it at that and pass it over to Felix. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I answer some of the questions that you have posed, let me just introduce my organization, the Seoul International Academy, which was established about 4 years ago in Seoul, registered with Minister of Foreign Affairs. And then our organization has been working on the general foreign policy and other related matters. Also recently, for the last 10 years, under the SILA, we had CS Lab, which is Center for Climate Sustainable Development Law and Policy, which has focused on the developing and assisting the policies of their governments, not only in Korea, also other countries as well. Well, we already heard about some of the important role of the carbon pricing. I don't think I need to repeat it. So referring to that, let me just come to the Korean side, how we can use the carbon pricing issues in general. There are two aspects as you posed. One is about the developing domestic context, and the other one is about the international cooperation context. In the sense, these days, whenever I walk around, and people ask, "Are you Korean?" And then 안녕하세요, right? I like a K-pop, I like a K-drama, right? It sounds like Korea has become very international. However, and then we are exporting a lot of vehicles and other fascinating Samsung cell phones and others. However, Korea has a very big challenges domestically, because we are a very good learner when we were developing our economy in the 70s, 80s, by implementing all the good advices from the developed world, right? They advised us to focus on the, first of all, textile industry, which we did, and then we moved to the heavy industries. So we produce a lot of steels for the entire world, and then we have a petrochemical industries, and then we have a vehicle industries. All of them are very energy intensive. At the time, nobody advised us that you should focus on decarbonized industry, right? So, and then if you, I think all of you may want to visit the Seoul, right? Which is a fascinating city now. And then I live there. I live in Gangnam, right? You should know the Gangnam style. I live there, right? And then if you come to Korea, actually Korea it has a small land size and then having the big population, in the sense that our embedded feature to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is very, very challenging, right? We do have a domestic ETS system, and that this was the first introduced in the world among the non-annexion parties. And then we have nationwide systems. So we have a very good at managing all these systems of the ETS and other carbon pricing measures at the domestic level. However, because our industrial feature, then it's too much for Korea actually to reduce greenhouse emissions at the domestic level only. So that comes into very unique feature of the Korean NDC. If you take a look at Korean NDC, whenever we want to work together between or among the countries, the first thing that you should do is you should take a look at the NDCs of the country, right? If you take a look at Korean NDC, which is a very unique feature. As of the 2030, Korean NDC stipulates that we are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions about 37 million tons only using Article 6 mechanisms. So this is it's almost legally binding. Okay, so because of the reasons that I explained before, we are making our every effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions domestically. However, Article 6 kindly allow us to engage in making the cooperation on the voluntary basis with other partner countries so that we can implement NDCs together. So that is a very good contributions to achieve the goal of the Paris Agreement. So in that sense, 37 million tons of the CO2 must be reduced only in the single year 2030 by using Article 6. In that sense, one of the issues and the challenges that the Republic of Korea has now is that how we can achieve that large amount of the reductions, right? I don't think that Korean taxpayers would allow us just buying the credits from the outside. Right. So here, our main Korean approach is, okay, let's develop the sort of, a large scale of the strategies to work together with the partner countries, maybe at the country level or, jurisdictional level. So that we can not only, developing the credits, but mainly we can work together with the developing countries for their sustainable development. It can be easily posed at the president level in a way of building the bilateral, relationship at the country level. So in the forest sector, because thankfully we already have a virtual framework. So Republic of Korea Forest Service, which is in charge of the forest sector, actually develop, has been discussing already with the Lao PDR to develop the jurisdiction level, projects so that we can engage in the, large scale of the cooperation. And recently, I think in the context, in general, one challenge lies in the energy sector. Thanks to the successful achievements from the CDM, somehow we are very good at developing and implementing project level of the activities. However, as I indicated that Republic of Korea may require, large scale of the engagements beyond the pressure level. So we can think about the program activities, and we can think about the beyond that, based on some of the rules that we are almost getting into the agreement, on the Article 6. So it requires a large, amount of the creative thinkings, and then we need to have a good partners like UNDP and other international organizations, and maybe some others here. So these are some of the other ways of how we can expand the carbon market and carbon pricing issues in general. So Korea, in that sense, for the purpose of the NDC implementation, it has a good potential actually to develop this new paradigm in implementing Article 6 with the partner countries. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. And regarding to your question, Simone, how this carbon market can play a role to improve the NDC. Well, I think in your presentation, you mentioned 3-channel, the improvement of the stringency, and also to expand the coverage as well as the introduction of CDR. I think along that lines, I would like to mainly mention on the non-carbon dioxide greenhouse gas part. I think that firstly, regarding to the expansion of the coverage, we should consider that to cover more non-carbon dioxide greenhouse gas into the market, especially for methane and N2O. But of course, those non-carbon dioxide greenhouse gases are facing other challenges, and especially they are quite distributed among small-scale sources. So we could focus on those large-scale facilities. For example, that for the methane emissions in China, if we focus on the top 5% of emission facilities, that could cover almost 7% of China's energy methane. And if we cover those part of emission into the market, that could help that to improve the ambitions over time. And also, I think that this industrial source of N2O is also another eligible option to be covered in the market in terms of to increase ambitions of the NDC. And secondly, regarding to the CDR, I think right now people are talking different CDRs and especially focused on 5 of them. The first one is afforestation. The second one is BECCS. The third one is DACCS. But also there are other ideas, especially including the biochar and enhanced weathering, as well as some early discussion on the marine-based CDR. But I would like to mention, highlight the possibility of the biochar in the near term CDR potential. I think biochar is a very traditional and ready technology, which is quite different with other CDRs except afforestation. The biochar has been used for many years, including China, including Brazil, which transformed the biomass through a low temperature pyrolysis process into organic carbon and implement that into the soil, and which can achieve this carbon dioxide removal as well as to improve the soil quality and to improve the crop yield, so which can benefit from this improvement of sustainable development. And if we look at recent study, the recent study shows there probably a billion tons level of biochar CDR potential in the near term, which is quite amazing. And I think that probably we could consider design a CDR market that target on to realize those potential from those biochar as a CDR in the agriculture. But of course, we need to reserve several key challenges, and especially that methodology and MRV issues and how to achieve and unlock those kind of billion tons CDR potential in the near term and to increase the NDC ambitions. Let's stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak. And it's very exciting to see this full house of participants. And it's a lot of pressure to speak after a lot of experts already. My name is Xiaoxiao Lu. I'm the Senior Director of Climate of Environmental Defense Fund, Beijing office. EDF has been working on carbon market since the beginning of EU ETS and has been deeply involved in the pilot phase designing of China's regional market and national carbon market. So like a lot of the experts has already said, carbon pricing has been considered as one of the major policy instrument to reduce greenhouse gas emission in China. And EU ETS has been setting up a great goal or example for China to learn from. Like EU ETS has been, EU has been linking its ETS together with NDC goals. And when NDC goals has been stringent up, EU ETS also reform and stringent up a little bit. So that's actually give us a really clear signal that we are not only using ETS to help achieve NDC, but also NDC can help us set up absolute cap for ETS. So we hope to achieve a mutual benefit for these both policies. Luckily, China set up its national carbon market and the trading started operating in the July of 2021. It's already a couple of years until now. And maybe a lot of you haven't heard is China has its carbon market management decree or management regulation. It is the first ever China climate regulation at state council level. So you can tell how important it is considered in the climate portfolio in China policy instrument. And China has also set up the goal to transfer from dual energy intensity, which is absolute energy and energy intensity control to dual carbon goals. So that's actually giving out an opportunities for us to help China to set up an absolute cap for carbon market and further stringent its design of carbon market. So like the experts from UNDP said, ETS is a very complicated policy instrument, especially for developing countries. And China is the largest ETS, has been running while it's still in its way in peaking, because all of the other international ETS are setting up when its economy and emission has already peaking. So, which means China ETS has to face or solve a lot of challenges that there's no experience to learn from. Well, we find out this type of experience are very valuable for other developing countries to learn from. Like China just received a delegation from Turkey to learn from China's ETS, and we receive strong interest from other countries like Brazil, like other developing countries, trying to learn what's happening and where we can learn from a developing country to build ETS. ETS, the beauty of ETS is it's actually helping set up a stability of policy trajectory or expectation. Because we don't want all of the companies, private sectors, to saying that we're going to pay for it this year and then we don't know what happened in the future. So that's the advantage of ETS to set up this long-term policy stability, and also especially for developing countries when it still need a lot of infrastructure building and this and that, to help them set up a carbon pricing expectation to help them avoid stringent asset to be built in the future. And we hope this could also facilitate the private sector or public engagement segment of carbon market because it unlocks a lot of finance. Like EU has already received more than 200 billion euros out of the auction. And although China don't have an auction, but there's researchers like Professor Zhang just speak actively involved in the design of an auction. And of course, CCER and voluntary crediting system is an important aspect. And like a lot of the international trend in China, CCER just restarted early this year. And the surprisingly demand is far from supply. So we see the price of CCER in China, the certified carbon emission reduction, is very high. It's close to the compliance credits. So that's provide a lot of demand and also a great incentive for the private sector to actively engage in this. And with Article 6 progress, we can see the increasing public interest in the international trade that we might foresee in the future. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Very interesting insights on difficult questions, I admit, but you have very interesting and prompt replies. Now, if I may, we have still 15 minutes, but I want to leave 5 minutes for the concluding remarks. So 10 minutes for the questions. I was expecting to provide some questions, but since differently from other events, this room is full, I would like to open the floor to questions from the floor. So if anybody wants to go first. We probably don't have a mic. I'm asking to the technical support behind if we can have a mic, otherwise people can come here. Go first. Okay, while waiting, maybe I will be. Okay, she's coming. Stefano. No? Okay, thank you. Yes. While waiting for someone to break the ice, I will break. Okay, I was ready. So I have 1 and 2. Sorry, it was not.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentations and the debate. I actually have a question on the CBAM mechanism and its link with the ETS as it's now running in Europe. Do you foresee, first of all, a similar mechanism in your countries and an interlink with the ETS there? Thank you.
Yeah. I take also the second question. If you want to introduce yourself, I didn't say.
No, I apologize. My name is Nikita. I'm from the Russian Federation. I represent the steel industry.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm from Iceland. I would like to ask anyone in the panel that can answer my question, because I've been trying to understand how the Article 6 mechanism will actually work and what it means, having a hard time understanding it. What about the risk of a country selling these projects to the buying country? What about the risk that the selling country is then in a worse position to reach its own targets? Is that a real risk, and that this might even affect how they set their targets and such considerations? I'm trying to get a handle on that.
Thank you. Very interesting question. So on the CBAM evolution, who wants to go first? Anybody? Yes, please.
Although I don't represent the European Union, and then I do know something about the CBAM, so maybe I can mix it with a Korean perspective as well. Even if I wear the party tag, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm representing government side. So CBAM is a great instrument in terms of the promoting the importance of the carbon pricing. And then the European Union has been always in the front row actually to promote the carbon pricing and the linking it with its own ETS. So in this context, there is a great opportunities for us to mainstream the carbon pricing measures here and there in the world. From Korea's point of view, however, there are some issues that we do recognize the important approach of the European Union. So therefore, Korean government tries to inform the necessary stakeholders on the details of the European CBAM. At the same time, there are some issues coming up, raising the question. Maybe you can answer on it when you make your concluding remarks. European Union has been a symbol of the multilateralism and multilateral rules and norms, and then there are others. And then CBAM is a pretty looks like a unilateral. So there is a question about what is the future of the CBAM. Would it remain as a unitary measure, or is it just short-term based to go for more long-term based multilateral rulemaking? So there are some issues, and then I think this issue needs to be addressed, also explained and understood by the relevant stakeholders. So let me stop here. Right.
Yeah, regarding to the CBAM issues, I think from the research, it is quite clear that CBAM will not contribute to the reduction of the emission at global level. Its impact on the global emission is very small, even negligible. I think that a lot of research agree on that. So basically, from my perspective, I think the decision on CBAM from EU is a political decision. It's mainly want to bring those energy-intensive industries within EU on board, and then they give the CBAM that to protect those European Union industry from the competitiveness, from the competition of industries outside EU. But unfortunately, I think that the introduction of the CBAM to resolve this domestic problem by creating an even bigger serious problem at international level. Like our Korea colleague said, that it raised the concerns on the unilateral methods in the climate cooperation, and that may not good for the long-term cooperation. So I personally think the approach of CBAM is not the approach to promote more international cooperation. I think that probably we could consider more direction towards linking different national carbon market smoothly within time, and to overcome the concerns of competitiveness by converging the carbon price over a different carbon market, instead of to implement those CBAM as a unilateral trade matter. Thank you.
Thank you. The CBAM question is always the right question to animate a party, I think. There was another interesting question on the risk that Article 6 might generate for reaching domestic targets. Leticia.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question, and it's actually something that we are very concerned about, because the negotiations here have postponed discussions related to the NDC trajectory to 2028. So then it becomes very difficult to know how the corresponding adjustments would be made. If you don't have the NDC trajectory methods, anyone can present any sort of trajectory that they want. So this connects also to the point that Professor Chung was making in his first intervention with regards to the projects. When you have project level methodologies, since they are doing a much more accurate measurement, usually the higher carbon content is used because you're certain of this measurement. Meanwhile, in greenhouse gases, you're doing at the sectoral level, so it's less accurate and more conservative. Matching these two numbers within the NDC account is something that no one really knows how it's going to be done. So this is a real challenge, and one of the reasons behind us working in a jurisdictional approach. If you do an intervention at the sectoral level, you are more certain to have this consistency with the inventory. And then with your partner country, you can have this type of discussions related to overselling. Part of the results can be maintained by the host country, and another part can be acquired by the other partner. But to address this in the current time, when we work with countries as UNDP, we are supporting them on the development of these trajectories, because the first NDC was a lot based, it was just 2 points in time. No, this is where I was before and this is where I'm gonna get. But you can have all sorts of ways in which you get to that final point. And for the corresponding adjustments is a year-by-year basis. Maybe as the reports start coming in, we will have some clarity, but the reason why there are so little authorizations at this point in time is because host countries are very aware of this risk, and they're being really cautious with their approvals of ETMOs at the moment.
Let me use 1 minute if it is okay. So we all know that there are big differences between the CDM and then Article 6 because all the parties needs to report now, right? Using the Article 13 process. So here, when we approach especially hosted governments, especially developing countries, then Article 6 may function as a matter of the window for the financing. So in other words, if we only think about the market itself, then we don't necessarily think about how to integrate the ODA policies and some other additional funding opportunities. But if we bring this Article 6 issue, not only carbon market issues, also issue of the financing for the sustainable development for the developing countries, there are different options. They can provide more feasible answers on how two parties may agree on how to share the emission outcomes in the end. So that may be another way that we can answer on that question. Thank you.
Thank you. It's time for the concluding remarks from someone who has somehow already been called on. We have the pleasure and the honor to have Jan Duzik from DG Climate, Deputy Director General DG Climate, since September 2024. Prior to this position, he was in the Czech Ministry of the Environment, Deputy Minister for Climate Protection and Government Envoy for International Climate Negotiations, and also at UNEP. The floor is yours, and it's a difficult conclusions, but we look forward to your remarks in 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'll do my best. Of course, that could be much longer, but I can summarize with my thoughts and with reaction to something what has been said here as well. No, we are now heading towards the post-2030 NDCs, and we will get at the end of this year the biennial transparency reports, which will give us a good picture where we stand in terms of our ambition as regards the transition away from fossil fuels, decarbonization, and the follow-up of the global stock take outcomes. And that should all lead to the next ambitious NDCs, because as we saw earlier, at the moment with the current NDCs, we are set for temperatures of 2.6 to 3.1 by the end of this century. So we need to understand this collective progress, and the domestic carbon pricing instruments and carbon markets are, in our perspective, a very strong tool, where the international carbon market also has a useful role to play. We have seen here in the COP a significant achievement regarding the Article 4 in the first day, when the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism was agreed, and the rules for certification of high environmental integrity emission reductions and removal credits are set by this standard, and that's an important internationally recognized high quality benchmark, and I think we should be happy with that progress, and we hope to see more on the whole rule book of Article 6 later in the COP. Now, the European Union has put in an ambitious NDC with a strong policy mix. It has the 55% target to 2030, and currently the compliance carbon markets cover about 75% of our greenhouse gas emissions. That is including the new part of the ETS, the so-called ETS2, that will cover buildings and transport. As I said, international carbon markets can play a complementary role. Our own ETS is aimed to be achieved through domestic reductions, but the EU companies which are willing to go beyond the existing compliance obligation through the VCMs, or the member states of the EU which want to achieve their national greenhouse gas targets beyond what is in the EU NDCs can do so through Article 6. We also have a draft legislation on the Green Claims Directive, which is aimed to prevent greenwashing in corporate claims and also specifically looking at the carbon credits. And we want to make sure that there is a prioritization of the value chain emission reductions following the mitigation hierarchy. And if they choose to offset their emissions, they can rely on carbon credits of high integrity and be accounted correctly. And we see the compliance system also as an important tool for generating revenues, which are then put back into decarbonization. We also see an importance of enhancing removals of carbon, both through nature-based mechanisms and technology-based. And we have our own criteria, including monitoring and reporting in the so-called CRCF, the Carbon Removal Certification Framework Regulation. CBAM was mentioned here. I will not go to a great detail, just to say a few points. First of all, the objective of that measure is truly climatic, to look into sectors which were not covered in the ETS so far, to basically put the reduction of carbon through these measures. They are measured. They are tailored towards goods. And our objective, indeed, and that's also part of our climate diplomacy, is that we see a proliferation of carbon pricing and carbon markets around the world that would put the price on carbon everywhere, and that would achieve the emission reductions. So we are looking at our producers in all the CBAM sectors as well as the previous ETS sectors to reduce the emissions. And of course, there is a whole discussion here. At the COP, they could not approve the agenda because they couldn't agree how to deal with unilateral measures. But there will be spaces to discuss this, and we will be happy to explain more. Finally, a few words on the integration, on the integrity of offsets. They need to look both on the demand side, avoiding that the domestic mitigation is deterred. It was also addressed here, that the mitigation benefits should not be at the cost of the developing countries being able to meet their own NDCs. On the supply side, on the other hand, the high quality and high integrity credits must be met. They have to be additional, permanent, not result in carbon leakage, not to be double counted, and again, not lead to a reduction in the potential of the developing countries to do their own mitigation efforts. So it can be an important source of revenue, but it should be said that this is complementary to mitigation action. They would not typically become abundant, but they should be correctly and highly valued, and therefore they will also be relatively scarce. So we foresee a lot of development in this area, and we are happy to continue explaining how the EU has approached, how we are engaging with partners around the world in the increasing use of the market mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for your words. Certainly, there is room for development in several respects. Today, we heard different but growing collaboration perspectives that we want to build upon. Unfortunately, we need to close this session for time constraints, but there is clearly appetite for more within COP and beyond COP, because the fight continues. We have a lot of work to be done. So thank you all for your contribution, and to the audience for participating.